right, so this is part 2 of the videos, and in this section you have story time with Mrs. J, and lucky you. Actually, you can listen to this or you can read on your own if you want to. The reading is posted in the module, but like I said, some people love to listen to people read, and actually, most people do. So if you want to listen to me reading to you, then feel free. But your job is to be listening for, reading for your specific focus question. The passage that I'm going to read to you comes from the book A Voyage Long and Strange. So this is the cover of that book. And the passage is about Christopher Columbus's first voyage. So you can see in this image right here, the map of Columbus's first voyage. So you see where he's leaving here. This is the country of Spain, and we have his ship leaving, a stop in the Canary Islands, and then into the Bahamas and Cuba, San Salvador, etc., and then heading back to Spain. So you can, mark up text on your own in the passage, or just listen to me and write down your answers for the focus question. All right, here we go. At sunset on September 25th, Penzone shouted from the Pinta that he'd sighted shore. Sailors on the Nina climbed the rigging and seconded the claim. In the morning, however, Columbus saw it was nothing more than squall clouds. 11 days later, the Nina fired its cannon, raising a flag to signal that land had appeared. This, too, was only an illusion. Columbus adjusted course to the southwest, following a flock of birds in hopes they would fly toward shore. By then, the ships had sailed for 4 weeks since last sighting land. This was double all previous records for ocean navigation, writes Samuel Eliot Morison. The ships were also well past the point by which Columbus had expected to reach Asia. The hourglass on his men's patience had run out. They could stand it no longer, Columbus wrote on October 10th. He reproached the sailors for their lack of spirit and made it plain their complaints were useless. I had started out to find the Indies, he told them, and would continue until I accomplished that mission with the help of our Lord. The next day he saw green reeds and a stick in the water. That looks man-made. He doubled the number of lookouts and reminded them that the first to make a confirmed sighting of land would receive a large cash prize from the crown and a silk doublet from him. Late that night, Columbus thought he saw a light to the west, like a little wax candle bobbing up and down. He summoned 2 other men. One saw the light and the other did not. It was such an uncertain thing that I did not feel it was adequate proof of land. 4 hours later, the Pinta fired one of its guns. A lookout named Rodrigo de Triana had sighted land about 6 miles to the west. Columbus reconsidered his doubts from the night before. I now believe that the light I saw earlier was a sign from God that it was truly the first positive indication of land. Scholars and naval officers have concluded that Columbus couldn't have seen a fire or any other light the night before when his ship lay about 35 miles offshore. Overwrought and exhausted, he may have imagined a light where there was none. But Columbus claimed the honor of discovery and the reward. Of Rodrigo de Triana, we hear no more in the Navigator's Journal. The morning of October 12th brought Columbus his first clear view of the coast. At dawn, we saw naked people, and I went ashore in the ship's boat, he wrote. He raised banners emblazoned with a green cross and the initials of Spain's monarchs, claiming the land in their name. Columbus called it San Salvador, or Holy Savior. According to one account, he and his men then knelt to kiss the sand, thanking God who requited them after a voyage so long and strange. I first read Columbus's account of his landing at a writing studio 40 miles from my home, Washington, D.C., short for District of Columbia, a feminized version of Columbus. 2 state capitals and some 40 other U.S. cities, towns, and counties also bear this name. So do countless institutions, including Columbia University, which I attended. His landing date, of course, is a national holiday. Like most Americans, I'd never given any of this a second thought until I tracked down Columbus's path on a nautical chart pinned to my office wall. Only then did it occur to me that the nation's capital and a host of other cities across the land are named for a man who never set foot on this continent. Just to be sure, I skipped ahead, tracing the rest of his voyage and 3 later sails he made across the Atlantic. Columbus hopscotched all over the Americas between 1492 and 1504 and was the first European to land at a score of modern nations. Not once did he see or touch anything that later became U.S. soil. I returned to his first landing at the island called San Salvador. The literature on this alone could fill a bookshelf. A painting of the scene adorns the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, yet as with so much about Columbus, a key detail remains mysterious. Where exactly was he? As best as mariners and scholars can determine, Columbus made landfall at the eastern edge of the Bahamas, some 400 miles southeast of Florida. But the Bahamas are an archipelago of 700 islands, plus 3 times that number of the sand and coral islets called cays. Elaborate cases have been made for at least 9 different islands and cays, including one named Watlings, that helpfully rechristened itself San Salvador in 1926. But no conclusive trace of Columbus's Bahamian visit has yet been found. The mystery of this landing site is all the more tantalizing because of what he wrote about it. The journal entries for the week he spent touring San Salvador and nearby isles read like postcards from paradise. The water is very clear and you can see the bottom during daylight hours. Here the fishes are so unlike ours that it is amazing, colored in 1,000 ways and so bright that anyone would marvel. He observes strange plants with equal relish. You can even smell the flowers as you approach this coast. It's the most fragrant thing on earth. Though animal life was sparse, Columbus and his men sampled a local delicacy, a 6-foot serpent that was probably an iguana. "Tastes like chicken," Columbus observed. He also marveled at the naked islanders who greeted him on the beach, describing them as tall, well-proportioned, and the color of sunburned peasants, with very pretty eyes and straight hair worn short in front and long in back. Columbus, believing he had reached the islands off the Orient, called the natives Indios, or Indians. In a roundabout way, he was right. Columbus hadn't reached Asia, but he had stumbled upon people of Asian stock. The islanders, like the natives encountered by Vikings, were distantly descended from migrants who had crossed from Asia to America thousands of years before. Columbus's perspective was also influenced by his earlier travels in the Old World. Islanders lived in tall, airy structures that resembled Moorish tents and traveled in boats fashioned in one piece from the trunks of trees, which he called almadies, the Portuguese term for African dugouts. Only later would he learn the native word cano. He also noted swinging beds made from nets of cotton, which islanders called hammoca. Like canoes, hammocks would quickly become part of the European lexicon, and a convenience adopted by sailors. Communication at this point was limited to gestures, so it's hard to know how Columbus learned that the native term for San Salvador was ganhani, which may have been a word for iguana. Even more dubious were his attempts at divining native beliefs. "By the signs they made, I think they're asking if we came from heaven," he wrote, adding that they shouted to one another, "Come see the men from heaven." He would repeat this claim at other islands, and later visitors to America took up the self-serving belief that awestruck natives thought Europeans fell from the sky. Columbus also helped implant the image of Indians as childlike innocents. "I cannot get over the fact of how docile these people are," he wrote. Later he called them tractable. The first evidence of this came on the beach at San Salvador, where Columbus distributed trinkets that had been market-tested in Africa: red caps, glass beads, and small tinkling hawk's bells. Natives took great pleasure in this and offered all they owned in exchange, including parrots and balls of cotton. Columbus's men, like the Vikings before them, couldn't believe their luck and started swapping broken glass and crockery for spears tipped with fish teeth. The islanders were accommodating in other ways, too. Some brought us water, others things to eat, Columbus wrote. Others, seeing that I did not care to go ashore, jumped into the sea and swam out to us. On another island, natives showed crewmen where to find fresh water and carried full casks to the boats. It's impossible to know whether natives behaved this way out of instinctive hospitality, for fear of the Spanish swords, or in hopes of extracting more bells and beads. But Columbus's response says much about his mindset and the legacy of his voyage. After just a few hours ashore, he wrote of the islanders, they ought to make good and skilled servants. 2 days later, having departed San Salvador with 7 captives to bring to the king and queen, he added, after they learn our language, I shall return them unless your highness order that the entire population be taken to Castile or held captive here. With 50 men, you could subject everyone and make them do what you wish. As callous as his sentiment appears, Columbus didn't conjure it out of nowhere. He voyaged to slave ports in Africa, to the Atlantic island of Madeira, where the Portuguese imported slaves to work on sugar plantations, and to the Canaries, where the Spanish were completing the conquest and enslavement of the native Guanches. Europeans also enslaved Muslims, captured in battle, and in earlier times had done the same to the Slavs. The origin of the word slave. Columbus's tragic contribution was to be the first European to see the potential for forced labor in the New World. Another enduring affliction also traces back to that first seemingly innocent encounter at San Salvador. Among the goods the natives offered sailors was a kind of dry leaf that would hold in great esteem. This mysterious plant reappeared on other islands where Columbus finally recognized its use. Men and women carried a half-burnt weed in their hands, being the herbs they are accustomed to smoke. The herbs were rolled inside a leaf to form tubes the natives called tobaccos. Before long, tobacco would hook Europeans and become one of America's most profitable exports. In 1492, however, Columbus was fixated on a more familiar commodity. He noticed a piece of gold hanging from an islander's nose and learned by signs that a sail to the south would lead him to a king who has great containers of it. Back at sea, the natives he sees directed him to an island where they said people wore gold bracelets. Columbus suspected they made up the tale in order to get me to put ashore so they could escape. But he landed anyway, staying just long enough to establish that there wasn't any gold. Then he headed off for yet another island, rumored to be even richer. Thus began the frantic chase after precious metal that would drive Spanish all over the Americas in the 50 years to follow. This is where I'm going to stop reading the passage, and I think you have enough to answer your 3 focus questions. However, if you want to read the last little bit that I put in here, you certainly can feel free to do so. And I'm going to pause this one, and there'll be one other video that I'll post just to explain what to do in the last part of the lesson today.